بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. This is the section on the Prophet ﷺ's bodyguards, حراسه, بيان حراس النبي المصطفى صلى عليه ربنا وشرفا. To clarify who were the bodyguards of the chosen Prophet, benedictions and our Lord's honor upon him, we say, حرسه في يوم بدر سعد فتى معاذ وامرأان بعد. His bodyguard on the day of Badr was Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, and then Mu'adh, the son of Mu'adh, and they included two at Uhud, Muhammad ibn Maslama and Dhakwan, both of them, alayhim ar-rahmatu wa ridwanu. The Prophet ﷺ had bodyguards, and his initially he took bodyguards, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after the battle of Uhud, when he lost one of his tooth was broken, and he also had Ibn Qamiya hit him so hard that the chainmail actually got into his cheek. So one of the links in the chainmail, because they wore the helmet, and then the helmet had the chainmail on the side to protect from blows. You've probably seen these in museums. So he hit him so hard that, and he said, take that, from Ibn Qamiya, and the Prophet said, Aqma'ak Allah, and he ended up also coming to a bad end. So the Prophet ﷺ, after Uhud, Allah said, Wallahu ya'asimuka minan nas, Allah will protect you from the people. At that point, he gave up bodyguards. He no longer used bodyguards. He did not have people guard his house. There were, a lot of people don't know this, there were actually 13 assassination attempts on his life. So you can imagine the type of conditions that they were in. There were attempts at poison. There were attempts at, one man came to him. He was resting under a tree, and he was one of the Arabs, desert Arabs. He came, and he raised up his sword, and he said, who will protect you now? And he was about to kill him, and the Prophet said, Allah. And at that point, he dropped his sword and just started shaking. He couldn't even. And then the Prophet picked the sword up and said, who will protect you? And the man said, be quick. And the Prophet said, just go. So he let him go. So he forgave the people that attempted to kill him. He forgave all of those people, even the Jewish woman that poisoned him. He forgave her. And in the riwayah that says she was killed, she was not killed for the Prophet ﷺ, but for one of the Sahaba who died from the poison. In the riwayah, one riwayah says that she wasn't killed, that he just forgave her. But in the riwayah that says she was, it was not for him, it was for the other. Because any haqq of his own, he forgave people. But when it was the haqq of others, he did not. So always when it was his own right, he forgave people. But when it was for others, he did not. So, and then he says, what Haris Zubair yawm al-Khandaqi, Zubair ibn Awam was his protector on the day of al-Khandaq. Ibn Abi Waqqas and khayru mushfiqi. And also Zubair was his hawari. Zubair clung to him. Zubair, at the Battle of Uhud, they said that he took over 70 blows for the Prophet ﷺ, that he was literally jumping to catch arrows that were coming down. So these were like, I mentioned this before about the Secret Service. They do the same thing, but they have to be trained like Pavlovian dogs to go against their nature, because it's very difficult for a person. Self-preservation is the first law, and parents will do it for children out of excessive love. So a parent will jump in front of a car to save the child, but it's a very It just goes against our instincts. So these people this was like love of a father for the child. It's that where the love is greater than the love of self. And the Arabs, the word batal in Arabic is a very interesting word, because batal comes from a word batula, to be false. And so the hero, you wonder why the Arabs, the words that they use for things always have root meanings, and then the root meanings are usually, there's always a metaphysical principle behind why that word is chosen. The word for hero in Arabic comes from falsehood. But the reason the batal is called batal is because abtala nafsahu li ajli ghayri. Because he's willing to eliminate his ego, his self, his own nafs for something greater. So the batal is the one that transcends himself. So he transcends the falsehood of his own self for something greater. And that's where the idea of batal comes from. So these men were true abtal. And Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, I thought it was very interesting, because when one of the boys came in, Hani Khoja's son, and his name's Hamza, and he said, "Oh, mashallah, al-batal," and then he said star in English. He said star, anta star. And then he looked at me and he said, star is, the Prophet ﷺ used that term. Ashabi kan nujum. My companions are like stars. And also Imam Shafi'i said about Imam Malik, he said, إِذَا ذُكِرَ الْعُلَمَاءُ فَمَالِكٌ النَّجْمُ. If the scholars are mentioned, Malik is the star. So he was just saying how that modern word is actually a word that the Arabs used to describe the stars. But shattana ma baina nujumina wa nujumihim. Big difference between our stars and their stars. ثم أبو أيوب بن بشري في خيبر المشهور دون النكري. Abu Ayyub and Ibn Bishr were all at the famous battle of Khaybar. So these men were with the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet at this point was completely unconcerned, because Allah promised him tawalla amruhu, ismatuhu, his protection. But there were still, the Sahaba were, it's like Abu Bakr when he was riding on the camel and Suraqa was just behind him. He kept looking back, and then he would look at the Prophet, and the Prophet was completely relaxed. He was reciting the Quran. He wasn't bothered by it. But Abu Bakr was so nervous. And the same when they were in the cave. The Prophet ﷺ had complete sakina, because he was in a complete state of trust with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had no doubts about what he was doing. But the asbab, in the world of asbab, the asbab for most of us are overpowering, the asbab. But when you're in a state of istighraq, when you're in a state of complete presence with Allah, the asbab are almost comical. There's a comical element to them, which is why there's something really quite humorous about the root of existence, that you just can't take things as seriously as people that are still completely veiled by the asbab. So the Prophet ﷺ he was in a complete state of trust during all this time. And then he said, قَدْ حَرَسُوهُ ثُمَّ فِي وَادِ الْقُرَى. Wad al-Qura is the place that on their way to Khaybar, on the way back, and there were some of the Jews that had gone out, shot at them at Wad al-Qura. كان بلال حارسا بالامتراء, and also Bilal, the Ibn Abi Rabah, the Habashi مؤذن of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. وترك الحراس لما أخبر بعصمة الله له خير الورى. So the best of creation, later abandoned bodyguards after being informed that he was under God's direct protection.